Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be talking about special obligations,
Ooh, yeah, yeah.
a concept that I think we all kind of have an intuition about,
Right.
but when you try to pin it down philosophically, it gets really, really tricky. And the source material for this one is going to be the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So,
Classic.
yeah, real, a philosophical deep dive. But I think you're going to be able to help us unpack it in a way that's uh, approachable and understandable.
Oh, I hope so.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a big topic for sure.
Yeah. So, you know, well, I think a good way to think about this is imagine you're a philosopher and you're presented with the question, do we owe more to certain people?
Mm-hmm.
Not just because they're human beings,
Right.
which, everyone deserves respect and dignity and all
Yeah,
that.
basic respect.
Exactly. But because of our relationship with them.
Yes.
Does that relationship create some kind of special obligation?
Right. Additional moral weight, in a way.
Yes, exactly. And so right away, we can think of some common sense examples, obligations to family, friends, people we've made promises to. But right away, this kind of bumps into consequentialism
Right.
because consequentialism says that, the right action is whatever maximizes the overall good.
The good for everyone.
Exactly, regardless of who benefits.
Right.
So how do we square that circle?
Right. So, I mean, consequentialists would say, well, why think that you have to do something for a stranger if it would be much better to help your friend?
Right. And so their argument would be that in practice, by favoring those close to us, it actually does end up producing the best outcomes.
Usually. Yeah. Often it does. I mean, you could see how,
Yeah.
for society to flourish, you need strong families, for example.
Or if I keep my promises, that builds trust, which benefits everyone in the long run.
Right.
Right. Something like that.
Or even just the fact that you're probably going to be better at helping people that you know well.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And caring for them.
You're better positioned to help those closest to you. But here's the thing that I think is really tricky.
Yeah.
It seems like for them, for consequentialists, that's just a happy side effect.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it would be good if it happened to maximize the good, but that's not what makes it right.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not really a genuine obligation.
Right. Yeah. It's instrumentally valuable.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like if somehow ignoring my friend led to more total good,
Yeah.
then I would be obligated to ignore my friend.
Then you got to do it. You got to ignore your friend.
Right. And that's where I think, a lot of people would say, well, hold on a second. That doesn't sit right.
Right.
Like, I feel like, there's something more going on here. Like, these relationships, they're not just valuable because they produce good outcomes.
Right.
Like, they have some kind of inherent worth, regardless of the consequences. Yeah. And so that's where the debate goes. And, people will say, well, wait a minute, maybe special obligations are grounded in something else. Like maybe it's just the nature of making a certain kind of commitment or, the kind of person that you are when you honor those commitments.
So I can imagine someone saying, well, okay, I get it. These relationships are special,
Mm-hmm.
but why am I bound by them? Especially those I didn't choose.
Right. Show me the contract where I signed on the dotted line to be a son.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the voluntarist objection.
Right. Where did I sign up for this?
Exactly. And the excerpt goes over 3 responses to that.
Okay.
One is to say, well, only explicit agreements like promises create obligations.
So if I didn't sit down with my parents and sign a contract,
Right.
like I agree to be your son,
Yeah. You've got to see it in writing.
then I have no obligations,
Right.
which seems far too narrow.
Right. Yeah, that's a little narrow.
Yeah.
And so then the other response to that is to say, well, maybe all obligations are really contracts, even if they're unspoken.
Okay, so I can imagine someone saying, well, by living in a country, I implicitly agree to its laws,
Right. Tacit consent.
even if I never formally,
Yeah.
signed on the dotted line,
Yeah.
to be a citizen of this country.
Yeah.
But even that seems strained when it comes to, family or citizenship, because I didn't choose those
Right.
in any meaningful way. I didn't, pick my parents,
Yeah.
pick my country, at least not initially.
Yeah. No, that's fair. So then the third way to respond to the voluntarist would be to say, well, maybe special obligations, they don't come about by a one-time consent, but from an ongoing participation in a relationship.
So you're saying it's not like I sign a contract one day and that's it. It's like, by participating, I weave this web of commitment that generates duties,
Right.
even if I didn't like choose them at the very beginning.
Right, and that's how a lot of our relationships, at least with family or close friends, work, right?
Yeah.
It's not like you go to your friend and you say, "Hey, can we be friends?" It's just kind of something that happens over time.
Yeah, it's kind of built up gradually, and that does seem to capture something about how those relationships work, at least intuitively.
Mm-hmm.
But then this raises another question. What about obligations tied to roles that we didn't choose at all?
Right.
Like daughter, citizen. Do those create, genuine moral demands on me? Or are they just social pressures that I can opt out of?
Yeah, yeah. And so there's this difference between what a role expects of you and what morality requires.
Right, right. So, I can imagine like being a Nazi officer, there might be certain, twisted obligations
Yeah,
within that role.
within the role of a Nazi officer.
Right. But we wouldn't say that those were morally binding.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And that's a huge part of the debate, right? It's like,
Right.
how do you tell the difference?
Right.
So yeah, there are a lot of ways to respond to this challenge, right? Of how do roles generate obligations if you don't choose them?
Yeah, yeah. I'm eager to hear some possible answers to that.
Well, the excerpt goes over 5.
5. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So one is the true community view, and
Yeah.
it basically says that you only get these genuine obligations from groups that have certain features.
Okay. So like what kind of features are we talking about?
Well, like mutual concern among the members,
Mhm.
a commitment to equality, that kind of thing.
Okay. So, maybe like my book club where, we all, care about each other.
Right.
We value each other's opinions.
Yeah.
That would count as a true community.
Right.
But something like, I don't know, a group that's built on exploitation, even if they claim to have, internal obligations, we wouldn't say that those are genuinely morally binding.
Right. Yeah. 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 So then the second response is something called reflective acceptance.
Ooh, reflective acceptance.
So this is a little more hypothetical.
Yeah.
And basically it says a role, it gives you an obligation. If you think about it,
Mm-hmm.
you would agree to it, like a reasonable version of you.
Oh, so it's not whether I actually chose the role, but whether I would choose it if I really sat down and thought about it.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But isn't that awfully subjective?
Yeah.
Like what counts as reflective, That seems like it's going to vary a lot from person to person.
Right. Yeah. And you get into all sorts of questions about like, well, what standards do we use? How do we judge the reasonableness of our reflections?
Yeah, yeah. It's a slippery slope maybe.
But that's one response. Then there's the justice view.
Okay.
And this one's pretty straightforward. It just says, you only have an obligation if it's morally right to fulfill it, period.
So in the case of the Nazi officer, what they're doing is inherently unjust,
Right.
regardless of their role.
Right.
So no matter what the role says, morality trumps it.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. That makes sense. So what are the last two?
Okay. So the fourth one is the appeal to value.
Appeal to value. Okay.
And this one says that, if you really value a relationship, then you've got obligations in that relationship.
So if I genuinely value my friendship with someone,
Mm-hmm.
that means that I have certain duties towards them.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
I could see how that would be a kind of motivating factor.
Yeah.
If you really care about something, then you're gonna feel more obligated to act in its best interests.
Right. It connects the value to the action.
Yeah, yeah. And then the last one,
The fifth response is something called constitutive commitments.
constitutive commitments.
Oh.
Ooh, that sounds like a mouthful.
It's a big one.
Yeah.
But basically, it says that some roles are just so fundamental to who you are
Mm-hmm.
that they generate obligations.
So being a daughter is not just a role I play. It's part of who I am.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And because of that,
Yeah.
that comes with certain obligations towards my parents.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. It's it's not so much about choice.
Yeah.
It's about the very fabric of my being.
Right. Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So we've got these 5 different ways of understanding how roles can generate obligation.
Right.
Some of them focus on like the group itself. Some focus on, my own like internal reflection or my values, and some even connected to like my identity.
Yeah.
But it seems like they all have certain, strengths and weaknesses, and none of them are like completely satisfying on their own.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And that's part of the fun of this whole topic, I guess, is that there's no easy answer. But the excerpt doesn't stop there.
Oh no.
It goes on to raise another challenge.
Okay, hit me.
This is the distribution problem.
The distribution problem. Okay, what's that?
Well, it's the problem of fairness. Like if I'm allowed to favor my loved ones,
Mhm.
doesn't that mean that I'm doing less for people who might need it more, even if they're strangers?
Right. So we're kind of back to that tension with consequentialism.
Right.
How do I balance the needs of those closest to me with the needs of the wider world?
Exactly. Yeah. And the excerpt mentions some arguments from evolutionary ethics. Like maybe we're hardwired to favor our own kin.
So it's not really morality. It's just like our primal instincts.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Survival mechanisms from our ancestors.
Just protect your own no matter what.
Right. Right. But the excerpt cautions us against reducing morality to just biology.
Right. Right. We can't just say, well, evolution made me do it.
Yeah.
We still have to like think critically about our actions,
No.
even if they're rooted in these like deep-seated instincts.
Right. Yeah. So it's not a get out of jail free card.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But is there a better way, for people who want to defend special obligations to respond to this problem of fairness?
Well, one approach is to say, well, special obligations, they don't subtract from your other duties. They
Uh-huh.
just add more.
So it's not a zero-sum game. Like I can both, fulfill my basic duties to all people.
Right.
Like, not harming them,
Yeah.
treating them with respect,
Right.
but also go above and beyond for those closest to me.
Yeah. Like think of it as a baseline of moral consideration for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, you've got these special relationships that require additional care.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
But I still wonder about those really extreme cases. Like what if a stranger's life is at stake?
Right.
And my friend just needs help moving.
Right.
Like does any theory really give us a clear answer on how to weigh those?
That's a really tough one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't think there's a simple answer. It really depends on the specifics of the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
How great is the need? What are your own personal values?
Yeah, yeah. It feels like we're constantly navigating this gray area where there's no clear map.
Right.
We have to kind of feel our way through. But let's say for the sake of argument that we kind of accept this idea of special obligations.
Okay.
Even with all of these challenges, like what makes them so special in the first place? Yeah. That's the big question. Like what's the basis for thinking that I actually owe something extra to these people?
Yeah, what grounds that obligation?
And the Stanford Encyclopedia goes over, a whole bunch of different attempts to answer that.
Okay, bring it on.
Yeah. So there's the promissory approach, which says, well, these obligations, they come about because of the expectations that you raise in other people.
Okay. So when I make a promise to someone,
Right.
I'm saying you can rely on me.
Yeah.
And it would be wrong to like break that trust.
To violate those expectations that you created.
Well, what if the other person like doesn't really expect anything from me,
Right.
Does that weaken the obligation?
Yeah. That's one of the problems with this view is that it seems to put a lot of weight on the other person's psychological state. Like, what if they're super chill and they don't really hold me to a high standard? Does that mean that I can just slack off?
Yeah. It doesn't seem like a strong moral theory should depend so much on the other person's like personality.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point. So another approach is the Aristotelian view, and this one says, well, we owe things to people who deserve it.
Oh, okay.
Like friends who are really virtuous.
So hang out with morally excellent people and help them flourish.
Right.
That sounds lovely, but most of my friends as much as I love them, are not exactly paragons of virtue.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the criticisms of this view is that it sets a really high bar for who gets special treatment.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, what else is on the menu?
Well, there's the personal identity view.
Okay.
And this one gets a little bit meta. It basically, it takes theories of personal identity over time. Like how do we know that we're the same person today that we were yesterday?
Right, right.
And it applies those to relationships. So it says, just like psychological ties over time can connect our past and future selves, similar ties to other people can ground special obligations.
So it's like an extension of self-interest in a way.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
you care about the people who are close to you in the same way that you care about your future self.
Yeah. But doesn't that mean that self-interest becomes like the strongest obligation of all?
Right. And that's something that philosophers debate. Like what's the relationship between self-regard and duties to others?
Mhm.
Does one have to trump the other? Can they coexist?
Yeah. More philosophical puzzles to
Mhm.
ponder. What other grounding for special obligations does the excerpt offer?
Well, there's always the intuitionist approach,
Okay.
which just says, look, the moral weight of these relationships, it's just self-evident. We just know that certain relationships demand special consideration.
So it's like a moral gut feeling.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you don't need a theory, you just know.
Yeah. But how do I know that my intuitions are reliable?
Right.
What if they're just based on like, my upbringing
Mm-mm.
or my culture?
Yeah. And that's the big problem with intuitionism, right? It's like how do you tell the difference between a genuine moral insight and just a subjective feeling?
Right.
Or what happens when people have conflicting intuitions?
Yeah. It seems like every attempt to explain special obligations runs into some kind of obstacle.
Yeah.
Like are philosophers just making this more complicated than it needs to be?
I mean, maybe, but also, part of it is just that morality is complicated.
Yeah.
It's messy. It's full of these gray areas.
Yeah. It's not a simple, set of rules that you can just apply in every situation.
Yeah.
But these aren't just abstract thought experiments.
Oh, no.
Like these actually matter for how we live our lives.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they affect how we make decisions,
Yeah.
how we prioritize our responsibilities, how we treat the people around us.
Right.
So yeah, it's not just, playing games with concepts.
Right. And the excerpt actually takes us even further down the rabbit hole here
Yeah.
by introducing this idea of moral risk.
Ooh. Okay. Moral risk.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is basically the concern that special obligations can sometimes lead us to do terrible things,
Oh.
or to protect terrible people, all in the name of loyalty or love.
Ooh, that's interesting. Like, so for example, what if your best friend asks you to do something that you know is wrong? Like help them cover up a crime or something like that.
Right. Is my loyalty to my friend, does that override my duty to the law?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a tough one. And the excerpt actually explores a few different ways to think about that. So one response is to say, well, maybe the demands of these special relationships, they're not really moral obligations at all.
Okay.
They're more like personal reasons for action.
Yeah.
And you have to weigh those against your actual moral duties.
So it's like I have two different sets of scales.
Yeah.
Right. I've got one for personal consideration.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one for moral principles.
Yeah.
And I have to figure out which one carries more weight in this particular situation.
Yeah. Which is really hard.
Yeah, incredibly difficult.
Yeah. Another response is to say that only morally permissible actions can create special obligations in the first place.
Okay.
Like you can't join a criminal organization and then say, well, I have special obligations to my fellow criminals.
Right. Because the whole thing is corrupt from the very beginning.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's another approach.
Yeah.
And then there's another view that says only relationships that are themselves morally good can generate genuine obligations.
So a friendship that's based on, mutual respect and support, that would create real obligations.
Right.
But something that's, more toxic,
Right.
like based on manipulation or abuse,
Right.
that wouldn't count.
Right. So it really matters, what's the basis of the relationship.
Yeah. So we have to be mindful not only of the kinds of obligations that we have, but also the source of those obligations.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
is it rooted in something good,
Yeah.
or is it rooted in something bad?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. This has been such a thought-provoking dive.
Yeah.
You know, we've covered so much ground, like from these abstract philosophical foundations
Mm-hmm.
to these really, really concrete dilemmas.
Right.
It feels like we've only just scratched the surface of this topic.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's such a rich area, and to make things even more interesting,
But more.
the Stanford Encyclopedia actually ends with this really interesting question. It
Okay.
says, "Well, what about our obligations to animals?"
Ooh, interesting. You know, especially I'm thinking about pets. Like
Yeah.
we spend so much time,
Yeah.
energy, resources caring for our pets.
Right.
We treat them, in many cases like members of the family.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but can we really say that we have moral obligations to creatures that aren't human?
Yeah. And that's a huge question. And it's one that I think, philosophers are only starting to really grapple with in a serious way.
Yeah.
But it makes you think, right? It's like, well, what is it about certain relationships that creates those obligations in the first place?
Right.
Is it rationality? Is it the ability to reciprocate? Or is it something deeper?
Yeah.
You know?
Like, is it just about the bonds that we form?
Yeah. Like, we're both vulnerable. We both experience joy and suffering.
Right.
And maybe that's enough.
Yeah, those are really, really deep questions. And I think, the answer, it has real implications for how we live our lives.
Yeah.
How we treat animals.
Absolutely.
Not just our pets, but all creatures under our care.
Right. And that's where I think philosophy is so important, because it's not just about, these abstract debates.
Right.
It's about figuring out how to live, how to act.
Yeah. It's about shaping our ethical responsibilities.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like my brain is full.
Yeah.
We've gone from, trying to just define what special obligations even are to these potential conflicts with broader moral principles, and now even thinking about our duties to animals. It's been a wild ride.
Yeah, it really shows how much there is to think about in this area of philosophy. And it's not just theoretical.
Yeah.
This stuff really matters for how we actually live our lives.
So as we're kind of wrapping up this deep dive, what are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners are walking away with? Like, what's the so what of all this philosophical pondering?
Well, I hope that they've come to see that special obligations, they're not simple. It's not just a matter of always putting your loved ones first, no matter what. It's about trying to find a balance between those, those special reasons that you have, those relationships, and your duties to humanity as a whole.
Right. So it's like recognizing that even those closest to us, our most cherished relationships, those still exist within a larger moral framework.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think this deep dive has also shown how important it is to think critically about our moral choices. There's no easy answers. There's no formula that you can just plug in.
It's about questioning your assumptions.
Yeah.
Weighing different perspectives.
Yeah.
And trying to make choices that align with your values.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully our conversation has given people some tools, some ways of thinking about these issues.
Yeah, a richer vocabulary.
Yeah.
To grapple with these tough questions about, loyalty, about fairness, about the limits of obligation.
Because it's not just abstract. This is real life stuff.
Yeah, this is the stuff of family, of friendship.
Yeah.
Of our workplaces.
Yeah.
Of being citizens. It's everywhere.
It's part of what it means to be human, to be in relationship.
Yeah. So to everyone listening out there, as you're kind of figuring out your own special obligations, how to navigate these tricky waters, don't be afraid to seek out guidance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Read some philosophy. Talk to people you trust.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be open to different perspectives. Be willing to challenge your own assumptions.
Yeah, because in the end, it's all about trying to find that balance between honoring your personal commitments and upholding those bigger moral principles.
And as we change and grow as individuals and as a society, those conversations, those questions about what we owe each other, they're just going to become more and more important.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the world of special obligations.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep striving to live a life that reflects your deepest values.